Part 8. The Hearing. Previously on Ghost Creek. Penny Thompson returned to her family farm after her father died suddenly. Penny is haunted by memories of her mother, who died of cancer when Penny was a teenager, and the tragic death of her brother Eric in a car accident. Penny was resigned to the plan of selling the farm to the town of Westfield, which made a deal with Penny's father to keep the land undeveloped in exchange for a monthly payment. But before Penny could sign the deal and go back to the city, she and her old high school sweetheart, Chuck Foreman, now a sheriff's deputy, discovered a body buried in the embankment of the creek out by the cow pasture. Based on letters to Eric and Eric's suicide note, Penny and Chuck concluded that the body had been Oliver Epstein, who was Eric's lover. After Penny found her father's missing hammer, which was likely the murder weapon, Penny confided in Chuck that her father used to beat Eric and never accepted that Eric was gay. Penny and Chuck concluded that Penny's father probably killed Oliver. But Penny swore Chuck to secrecy about the family's secrets. Meanwhile, Penny struggled with the decision to sell the farm, knowing that it would likely be turned into a development. Her choice became moot when the sheriff and the mayor showed up at the farm to inform Penny that, under the terms of the open space lease, if a member of the Thompson family committed a crime on the land, the lease would be breached and the town could exercise its option to buy the farm for the agreed-upon price, less a 25% penalty. The sheriff declared the farm a crime scene and had a team of deputies search for evidence. Part 8. The Hearing. By mid-September, the pumpkins were green and growing. A few were even turning orange. Sheriff Baskin's crew spent 3 days combing through the Thompsons' farmhouse, barn, and fields, then took down the crime scene tape and allowed Penny to move back home. The same day, at 1 o'clock, a school bus rumbled up the drive, and Philip Harlow jumped out, followed by a dozen fellow students. The driver was a youthful-looking man with loose, sandy blonde hair, wearing blue overalls and a plaid short-sleeved shirt. The man dropped to a knee when Duke came toward him, barking. Within a minute, he had the old lab on his back, while the stranger rubbed his tummy. Philip called out when Penny approached. "Miss Thompson, we're back."
"I can see that. Shouldn't you still be in school?"
"They are." The sandy-haired man stood and wiped his hands on pressed overalls. "I'm Sam Olafson. I run the agriculture program at Westfield High."
"Glad to meet you, Mr. Olafson."
"Oh, please call me Sam. You made a big impression on Philip and these kids. They begged me to ask the school board to set up a learning program out here. They want to work the farm like a co-op to get real-world experience. The principal approved a 2-week pilot program so we can document how a co-op would work out here and make a case for a permanent program."
"You didn't think to let me know in advance that you were coming out with a dozen kids?"
"Chuck Foreman told me I should assume you'd agree."
"He did he?"
She laughed.
"Well, come on. Let's put these kids to work. I don't know how much longer I'm going to have the farm, but what the heck."
"I heard." Olafson removed a toothpick from his shirt pocket and chewed on it. "The hearing is tomorrow, right?"
"Yeah. You know, it's funny. 2 months ago, I couldn't wait to sell this farm and get back to the city. Now I'm worried the judge will force me to sell when I don't want to."
"I know these kids don't want you to sell."
"Thanks. Who knows? Maybe the town will still keep the farm as open space, even if they make me sell. You and the kids can show up at the town council meeting and lobby to keep the farm as an agricultural co-op."
"Sure we will, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right now it's an unofficial pilot project."
"Okay, well, let's go pilot the project,"
Penny said, and headed towards the barn. The next morning, Penny arrived at the courthouse, dressed in her best skirt and jacket combo. She had her roommate in the city ship more clothes to Westfield once it was obvious that she would be staying for a while. She sat nervously next to Stuart King as the courtroom filled. The citizens of Westfield flocked to the juicy gossip like buzzards to a carcass. The local newspaper had 2 reporters there. Penny saw Andrea Townsend, the freelance reporter who came out to the farm in July. She said she covered real estate issues. Penny supposed that who got custody of the farm constituted a real estate matter, but everyone else was treating it as a murder trial.
"Are we ready?"
Penny whispered to King, who looked distinguished in a 3-piece suit, complete with a pocket watch on a gold chain. He would have looked normal in a 1920 courtroom. He patted Penny's hand and said, "Don't worry. This is a declaratory judgment motion, not a criminal trial. Of course, if it were a trial, we'd have had months to prepare. Like I told you, since the mayor pulled political strings to get this heard so fast, we'll have grounds for an appeal if we lose." Behind Penny, in the public seating area, Chuck sat in a pressed sports jacket, white dress shirt, and a blue patterned tie. He looked far more nervous than Penny, but flashed her a smile and a pumped fist whenever she turned around to get his encouragement. Half the people in the gallery wanted Penny to keep the farm, so they would have the pumpkins and the corn maze like always. The other half thought Penny should never have moved away, and that if her father, or Eric, killed that boy, then the family should be run out of town. When Judge Adolphus Erickson called the hearing to order, the town's lawyer stood to give his opening statement. The judge had been on the bench for 40 years and was the most respected man in Westfield. Stuart had assured Penny that Judge Erickson would give them a fair hearing. The town's lawyer summarized the terms of the open space lease agreement between the town and Gary Thompson. Gary agreed to work the farm and keep it undeveloped. In exchange, the town made a monthly payment. If Gary breached the agreement, including the restrictions against illegal activity, then the town could buy the land and structures for $450,000. He left out the part about the 25% penalty. The real estate agent, Arthur Madden, who had offered Penny $1 million for the farm, sat in the back of the room. He had given Penny until October 31st to accept his offer on behalf of his undisclosed clients. Penny had decided not to sell, at least she was pretty sure, but the offer would be moot if the town bought the farm first. It was all up to the judge. Stuart King deferred any opening statement until after the town had put in its case. He explained to Penny that the town had the burden to prove that Gary breached the agreement before he died. The hearing wasn't actually the trial on the breach of contract case. It was the town's motion to have the court declare that, as a matter of fact, somebody murdered Oliver Epstein on the Thompson farm, and that Gary or Eric either did it or permitted it to happen. The town didn't have to prove who killed the boy, or whether it was a murder, a manslaughter, or some lesser crime, as long as it was a crime. If that declaratory judgment was entered, the breach of contract claim would be impossible for Penny to win at a later hearing. The town called Sheriff Baskins, who testified about Penny and Chuck finding the body and the subsequent investigation. He put into evidence the medical examiner's report about the cause of death. A blunt object bashed in the boy's skull. "It's very unlikely that anybody else could have murdered this boy," the sheriff testified. "Nobody else would have buried a body by the Thompson's Creek. There was no evidence that the body was moved after death. In my opinion, either Gary or Eric Thompson killed him, or if somebody else did it, then Gary or Eric knew about it and allowed it to happen. And burying that body on the property would be criminal activity, even if the person who buried it didn't kill the boy." Stuart King's cross-examination was simple.
Sheriff Baskins, in your professional opinion, what was the motive for either Gary or Eric Thompson to murder this boy from the city?
King was sure the sheriff did not have a good answer.
It could have been any number of things. We believe he was a friend of Eric's, according to information provided by Eric's sister. Maybe he tried to rob the Thompsons. Maybe he got into a fight with Eric.
The truth is, Sheriff,
King interrupted,
you have no idea what motive could have existed, and you're just speculating. Isn't that right?
King faced the judge when he asked the question.
I just testified about a bunch of possible motives,
the sheriff huffed. That's fine. Judge Erickson looked across the space toward the town's lawyer.
I get the point. The sheriff assumes there was a motive, but doesn't know what it is. Is that about right?
The town's lawyer nodded from his seat. King then continued.
And, Sheriff, isn't it possible somebody else killed the boy and decided to find a secluded spot on a quiet country road where the ground was soft next to a creek and buried the boy there? Isn't that possible?
Sure, Stewart. Anything is possible, but it's a lot less likely than the other option, which is that Gary or Eric killed him or had him killed there.
And wouldn't you agree, Sheriff, that if somebody else did kill that boy, and if the killer knew that Oliver Epstein was acquainted with Eric Thompson, it would make a lot of sense to bury the body on the Thompson farm, to throw suspicion on the Thompsons?
That's just speculation.
The sheriff waved his hand dismissively.
Exactly.
King paused and made eye contact with the judge.
Oh, and one last thing, Sheriff. You sent your boys out to the farm to comb through every inch of the house and the fields and the barn for 3 days, didn't you?
Yes.
And after all that, you didn't find anything there that could have been the murder weapon or any other evidence of a crime, did you?
No, we didn't. But the murder was 3 years ago, so that's not a surprise. We did notice that there were no hammers in the barn's workshop.
So, Sheriff, you want the judge to make a ruling here based on the absence of something that might have been the murder weapon. Is that it?
That's up to the judge, the sheriff mumbled.
Thank you, Sheriff.
The town's lawyer then said,
We called Deputy Chuck Foreman to the witness stand.
Chuck's face registered shock when Penny turned to look. A court deputy handed Chuck a subpoena, and he reluctantly marched to the witness box. He raised his right hand and placed his left hand on a Bible presented by the court clerk. While swearing to tell the truth, he looked directly at Penny.
Deputy Foreman, the lawyer asked Chuck, do you have an opinion about who killed Oliver Epstein?
Chuck looked at Penny.
I don't know anything about the circumstances of Oliver Epstein's death.
Mr. Foreman, you're a sheriff's deputy, are you not?
I am.
So, you are trained to observe things and spot evidence of criminal activity, isn't that right?
King pressed his palms against the counsel table, about to rise to make an objection, but then let the leading question slide.
Sure,
Chuck agreed.
And you've spent some time out there at the Thompson farm because you are a friend of Miss Penelope Thompson, right?
Yes, I'm a friend of Penny's.
And, Deputy Foreman, during your time out there with Miss Thompson, did you observe anything that might be connected to the death of Oliver Epstein?
Well, sir, I suppose any number of things could be connected. I mean, I saw the creek and where the body was buried, so I'm pretty sure that's connected. But I don't know who buried him out there.
In your time with Miss Thompson, did she tell you anything that... Objection!
King was on his feet.
Your Honor, the question is clearly soliciting a hearsay.
Sustained, Judge Erickson quickly ruled. The lawyer looked at the sheriff, who looked at the mayor. They both shrugged.
No further questions."
When King had no cross-examination, the judge dismissed Chuck. He glared at Sheriff Baskins as he walked back to his seat. The town put into evidence all the documents related to the open space lease agreement and some other documents related to the investigation, then rested its case. Stuart King then rose to address the court.
"Your Honor, I would like to make my opening statement at this time and combine it with my closing argument. The respondent has no witnesses to call. Your Honor, at stake here is this woman's right to retain control over her home and her farm. Penny Thompson's mother died in her bed on that farm. Her brother was tragically killed in an accident on the road outside the farm. Her father, as we all recall, recently died from a heart attack on that farm. Miss Thompson has returned to Westfield to bury her father and to work the farm, which she is currently doing with some extremely helpful assistance by students from Westfield High. Those kids are learning about farming on the land, which the town has generously guaranteed to remain open space as long as a member of the Thompson family lives there. It's not entirely clear why the mayor and the town council are in such a hurry to acquire title to the farm for the town. The reality is that the town is attempting to steal the farm from Penny Thompson, based on a trumped-up argument that Gary Thompson, or maybe Eric Thompson, violated the terms of the lease before they died. Those men are not here to defend themselves. There is no criminal finding here that any murder even happened. While I appreciate that our experienced and well-respected Sheriff Baskins has an opinion about what he thinks probably happened, this court cannot take Penny Thompson's farm from her based on the sheriff's opinion, no matter how sincere it may be or may not be.
A murmur ran through the gallery like a wave. What had King implied? That the sheriff had some ulterior motive? Judge Erickson slammed his gavel and bellowed for silence. The people complied, while the reporters furiously scribbled in their notebooks.
"What we have is a body buried on the property, and I'm willing to concede that the boy didn't kill himself by a blow to the head, and the body didn't bury itself. But, like the sheriff said, the murder could have happened elsewhere and may not have even involved the Thompson family at all. That creek bank is an attractive place to dispose of a body. The town hasn't put forth a shred of evidence that there was any motive for Gary or Eric Thompson to murder him, and I'm sure nobody here thinks old Farmer Thompson is the kind of man who could murder anyone. Why, I recall at Gary Thompson's funeral there was a parade of people who spoke up about what an honorable and generous man he was. Bringing this action to besmirch his memory is just reprehensible. The mayor should be ashamed of himself, and I implore this court to not participate in such a heinous endeavor. There's not enough proof here to convict a cat of killing a mouse. Let's finish this up and go back to doing some real work that benefits Westfield. That's all."
King gently sat back down in his chair. He had not paced the courtroom or gestured grandly during his speech. He stood at his counsel table, said his piece, then sat down. The town's attorney then made his closing argument, recapping the sheriff's opinion and arguing that it was the most likely explanation.
"The court is obliged to determine whether it is more probable than not that the crime occurred, and that either Gary or Eric Thompson was involved, or at least knew about it. If that is the most likely scenario, then the town has fulfilled its burden."
After a half-hour recess for lunch, the judge said he would write a formal decision later, but he announced from the bench what the decision would be. He found that the town had failed to fulfill its burden of proof, and that he would be denying the motion for a declaratory judgment. The mayor was livid and railed to reporters outside the courthouse, calling for Judge Erickson to be removed from the bench. The sheriff stood next to him, fuming. Penny watched for a few minutes, wondering why these two men were so hell-bent on taking her farm. Arthur Madden, the real estate agent, came by to shake Penny's hand and congratulate her on not losing the farm to the town. He reminded her that the $1 million offer was still on the table, but only until October 31st. Penny was a few steps away from Chuck's SUV when someone called her name. It was the freelance real estate reporter, Andrea Townsend. After congratulating Penny on keeping control of the farm, she asked whether Penny knew who owned the farmland on either side of her property.
"The farm to the west is the Sumner place,"
Penny said confidently.
"On the east, those woods have been there as long as I can remember. I'm not sure who owns it."
The reporter lowered her voice, as if not wanting to be overheard. "I can tell you that the Sumner family sold their farmland to a hedge fund. I haven't been able to uncover who owns that fund or owns its shares, but I know that the same fund owns the land to your east, those woods. Your farm is bracketed by 2 large parcels owned by the same people. Your land is worth more than you think, at least to whoever owns that hedge fund."